get into our intermittent series, Gifted and Grateful. We've got more on that coming up next month. But I'm really, really excited to have several consecutive weeks here to walk through John chapter 11. John chapter 11. Recently, in the gospel according to John, Jesus has done his 6th of 7 signs. And that was to heal a man who was born blind of his blindness. Even though that man was healed of his physical blindness, it did not heal the spiritual blindness of so many of the people who witnessed it. It leads to a discussion where Jesus says, quote, "I and the Father are one," for which the unbelieving Hebrews around him pick up stones to throw at him, not because of anything he's done, but because they believe that he's blaspheming God. And we made it really, really clear that if Jesus is not who he says he is, and he is, if Jesus is not who he says he is, that's exactly what he's doing. If Jesus is not who he says he is, claiming that he and the Father are one, making himself equal with the Father, equal with God, is blasphemy. But Jesus is who he says he is. And verse 39 of chapter 10 said, "Again they sought to arrest him, but he escaped from their hands. He went away across the Jordan to the place where John had been baptizing at first, and there he remained. And many came to him, and they said, 'John did no sign, but everything that John said about this man was true.' And many believed him there." Enter John chapter 11. Would you please meet me there in your copy of God's Word in John chapter 11. John chapter 11. We're going to begin in verse 1. And if you forgot a Bible or you don't have one with you this morning, there should be a hardback black Bible somewhere underneath the chair in front of you. And you can find John chapter 11, verse 1 on page 843 of those hardback black Bibles. John chapter 11, verse 1. We're going to go all the way through verse 16 this morning. But I'm going to begin by reading just through verse 5. John chapter 11, verse 1. If you're there, say, "I'm there." Ready. If you're ready, say, "I'm ready." Ready. Now, a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent to him being Jesus, saying, "Lord, he whom you love is ill." But when Jesus heard it, he said, "This illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it." Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So, when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Now, some of you might be thinking, I don't understand that last sentence. He loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard Lazarus was sick, he didn't go anywhere. He stayed where he was. Last week, while I was preaching, my dad was in the hospital. Things were looking shaky for him. Everything's resolved. Now he's home. He didn't have to have surgery that we thought he might have to have. Huge relief, huge blessing. I didn't know that until I turned this mic off and went back to my phone last Sunday. It was a blessing to see what God did. I love my dad. And if I had been in Jesus' shoes and my dad had been in Lazarus' shoes, this text would read differently. The text would read, Phil loved his dad. So he dropped everything and drove to the hospital at a slightly legal speed. There was a phrase that was common. It's common in the Old Testament. The phrase is, on the day of the Lord. It's a phrase that looks forward to a day where God will rightfully and righteously judge the enemies of Israel, where he will deliver Israel from their oppressors. And there's the capital D, day of the Lord. There's a day coming where Jesus will defeat the greatest enemies of his people and will deliver us not only from the penalty of our own sins, not only from the power of our own sin, but from the presence of sin entirely. The day of the Lord, capital D, is coming. But there's some lowercase d days of the Lord in the Old Testament. When he delivered them from Egypt. When he allowed them victory to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. If you're one of God's people, it's easy to get hyped on the day of the Lord. Unfortunately, this text does not afford me the opportunity to preach on the day of the Lord, but on the delay of the Lord. This text, this sermon, is ultimately for anyone who has a prodigal that's wandering, anyone who has a disease uncured, even anyone who has a loved one who's passed on. And are wondering to the Lord, what is taking you so long? Yeah, it's easy to get excited about the day of the Lord, but when you start talking about the delay of the Lord, people look at you about like y'all are looking at me. We don't like it. I've wondered why we don't like it. Maybe it's that we don't like delays. But that's not true. Because I've set up appointments with some of you. Some of you have set up appointments with me. And some of you have learned that the later it is in the day, the more likely I am to be running on pastor time. The first meeting went 2 minutes over, and the second meeting went 2 minutes over, and the third meeting went 2 minutes over, and by the time I get to the end of the day, I'm 15 to 20 minutes behind. I don't think it's that we don't like delays, because we delay all the time. I think it's that we don't like delays, listen now, that are outside of our control. And so it might not sound like good news at first, but I'm here to try to convince you, as I believe this text is this morning, that it is good news, that if you take nothing else from this text today, I want you to take this. Jesus is the Lord of the delay. Jesus is the Lord of the delay. That means the delay is submitted to him, not the other way around. Jesus doesn't have to wait on your circumstances like you do. Which means that if he is delaying, it is because he is choosing to. Jesus doesn't delay on accident, only on purpose. He is the Lord of the delay. And the first thing, thank you. The first thing that we see in this text is that Jesus is the Lord of the delay. So he plays the long game for God's glory. Jesus is the Lord of the delay. So he plays the long game for God's glory. Jesus isn't in the short game business. I heard one preacher recently say it this way: Jesus isn't here to make your horrible life a little better. Jesus is here to crucify your old life and raise it from the dead. He is the Lord of the delay, so he plays the long game for God's glory. I thought about putting like a couple of extra O's in the word long, just so it could resonate with how it feels sometimes. Some of you, you're here this morning and you are thinking, yeah, he plays a long game for God's glory. Let me see if I can show you that it's all for God's glory, starting again in verse 1. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. I've wondered, and we don't know exactly, why John put that sentence together like that. I think it's because he's writing to the early church. By the time John writes this letter and people are reading it, you say the word Lazarus, and people are like, oh, yeah. And I think one of the things that John wants us to do is he doesn't want us to skip to the end of the chapter. He doesn't want us to skip to the end of this story with Lazarus. And so he holds off on the name for just one phrase so that you can put yourself afresh in the minds of the people who are there. Someone's sick. A certain man is sick. Those of you who know somebody who's sick, you know that the whole world could be sick and it doesn't have the same impact on you as that certain person being sick. A certain man is sick. There's an intimacy, a nearness to the immediate part of the first part of this chapter. To give some more context, he gets ahead of himself in verse 2. We'll be there in a few weeks. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. John's trying to bring us into the family table of Jesus' friends. So the sisters, together, notice it's the two of them, agreeing together. So the sisters sent to him saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. What an interesting way to phrase that. To remind him. It's not unlike another Mary, Jesus' mother, Mary. In the first sign that he did, at the wedding feast in Cana, all she does is present the problem. They have no wine here. Here, again, just a short prayer presenting the problem to Jesus. Lord, he whom you love is ill. Verse 4. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now, be careful. I think John's trying to hold us in the moment. He doesn't want us to jump to the end of the story. Those of us who have been in church for a minute know what's going to happen. We know what's going to happen, but I want to show. So, spoiler alert, just pretend like you didn't hear this part, okay? Just pretend like you. Lazarus is going to raise from the dead. But I want you to notice, Jesus doesn't say this illness does not lead to death, but his resurrection will be for the glory of God. He says it is for the glory of God, meaning the illness that does not lead to death. The illness itself is for the glory of God. This goes back to the last sign that Jesus completed, helping a blind man restore his sight, healing a man who was born blind. That it is actually through the man's affliction, not just through his healing. Through his affliction that God ultimately gets glorified. The way that Jesus says this seems to indicate, and this is hard, it seems to indicate that if Jesus did nothing for Lazarus from this point forward, God would still be glorified in what happened to Lazarus. How many of you wish I could preach this morning on the day of the Lord rather than the delay of the Lord? So that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Jesus playing the long game sometimes means that our dissatisfaction with his delay is because our field of vision is too short-sighted. Sometimes, everybody say sometimes. Sometimes our dissatisfaction with Jesus' delay to resolve our circumstances is because we're too short-sighted. No, Pastor Phil, I'm trying to figure out how Jesus is going to sort this out this year. It's too short-sighted. This decade, too short-sighted. This lifetime, too short-sighted. I want to pull up for just a moment from our narrative to remind you all that we are on a 10,000-year plan. And that Jesus is playing the long game for God's glory. Jesus is the Lord of the delay. I don't like delays. You're serving the Lord of the delay. Not only is he willing to do it, but he's really good at it. Jesus is the Lord of the delay, so he plays the long game for God's glory. God's glory means that we ascribe to him that he is the source and purpose of all things. God is the ultimate purpose for Lazarus getting sick. Jesus is the Lord of the delay, so he plays the long game for God's glory. And then this: Jesus is the Lord of the delay out of love for his people. But sometimes Jesus delays because he loves us. I don't understand how that works. Well, in this text, Jesus nor John explain how it works. They just proclaim that it's true. Verse 5. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So, how many of you grew up with Schoolhouse Rock? Conjunction, junction. Wow. Y'all sounded better on the song earlier, but that's okay. That so is a causal conjunction, which means it is because Jesus loves Martha and her sister and Lazarus that when he hears that Lazarus is ill, he stays 2 days longer where he is. How does that work out? It doesn't say. But can we trust it? Can you trust that just because Jesus' words and actions don't make sense to you doesn't mean they're senseless? Just because Jesus' words and actions don't make sense to you does not mean that they are senseless. It is out of love for his people, John says, that he delays. Then, after, verse 7, everybody say after. Then after this, he said to the disciples, let's go to Judea again. It's not until after the 2 days of delaying. Jesus is the Lord of the delay out of love for his people. I get asked a question pretty much incessantly. The only person in our house who gets asked more is probably my wife. Am I old enough to watch? Fill in the blank. Can I watch this yet? Maybe they hear friends talking about a movie or a TV show. Can I watch this? I've explained to my kids that they have an internal guardian in their brain and in their heart, who when they hear and see certain things, they know to discount it, disregard it, or sometimes just straight up turn away from it. And that the little guardian that's in their brain and their heart is really poorly trained so far. Which means I'm going to do some of his work for him and guard from your eyes and your ears some things that you're not ready to have your guard stand at. But how many of you parents know, I didn't have to say all that because I'm their parent? And the answer, because I'm your father and because I said so, really is sufficient. Jesus doesn't seem to explain his delay here, but it does not take 1 ounce away from the fact that he is the Lord over and the Lord of the delay out of love for his people. Just because he didn't explain it to you doesn't mean he doesn't have an explanation. Just because you can't make sense of it doesn't mean it's senseless. It's almost like you have to really believe he is Lord and that you're not. Jesus is the Lord of the delay. So he plays the long game for God's glory. Jesus is the Lord of the delay out of love for his people. And then this is really surprising in the text. It's like surprising on top of surprising. Jesus is the Lord of the delay, even when he seems too soon. Too soon. Right? Isn't that so surprising? I love you, bro. I'm so glad you're here. It's good to see you. I'm really glad you're here. He just like shrugged at me, like, I'm just trying to help you preach, bro. This is surprising, but I want you to look at what the disciples say in verse 8. He's like, let's go to Judea again. In verse 7, the disciples said to him, Rabbi, which means teacher. The Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and you are going there again? No. This is actually really clever. This is really clever because Jesus didn't say, I'm going to Judea. He says, let's go to Judea. And the Jews respond, or the disciples respond, the Jews are just seeking to stone you, and you are going there? It's like they leave themselves off of the itinerary for a second. Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours in the day? Just because it doesn't make sense to you doesn't mean it's senseless. Are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. That was Jesus' way of saying, I'm only here for a limited time. It harkens back to the very first thing that John said about him, that he is the light of the world. It harkens back to this reality that light comes into the world and that he won't be here forever. And so he is on a mission to shine this light for the limited time that he's here. And then he hints at this glorious reality. He implies that one day the light will be in them. But I can see where the disciples are coming from with this objection. What? Have they even set those stones down yet? Just now, they were seeking to stone you to death. They don't know everything that's happening there. It doesn't make any sense to them. So isn't this funny? And isn't this the case? Those of you who have been in leadership, you know what this feels like. That there's something that you're aiming at, there's something that you're moving toward, and on one hand, Mary, Martha, Lazarus, while he's still breathing, are like, what is taking him so long? And on the other hand, the disciples are like, already? Right? Jesus is the Lord of the delay. And what that means is that he's not only obsessed with not going too fast, he's also obsessed with not going too slow. He's threading a needle here. There's a limited amount of time that he has to do these signs to encourage as many people as possible to believe, and by believing have life in his name. He's on a mission. He's on a mission that's bigger than the disciples' well-being, that's bigger than Lazarus' illness, that's bigger than what he may do with Lazarus' illness. He's on a mission. And so he's the Lord of the delay, even when he seems too soon. Then lastly this. Jesus is the Lord of the delay because he has redefined death. Jesus is the Lord of the delay because he has redefined death. Another way to say that is he can afford to delay as much as he wants because what everyone else considers the end of everything, Jesus views as optional. With Jesus, the only thing certain in life is taxes. Which he actually backs that up when he says, render to Caesar that, which is right. Anyway. He's redefining death. Look with me at verse 11. After, man, here comes John again with that word. After. How many of you would like Jesus to delete the afters in your life and sub them in for some whens and some befores? After saying these things, he said to them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. He's hinting. He's hinting at it. By the way, this is a tradition that's carried on into the book of Acts and on into the traditions of the church from the very beginning, that we don't talk about saints dying. We talk about those who are united with Jesus in his death, burial, and resurrection as falling asleep. Because we got somebody who can wake us up. Verse 12. The disciples said to him, Lord, because they're still like thinking like, maybe we don't have to go. Right? Maybe we don't actually need to go. Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will recover. I recover from falling asleep almost every day. Right? Then Jesus told them plainly. Man, it took 13 verses for him to just say it. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died. And then here comes more head-scratching stuff. And for your sake, I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. verse 16. So Thomas, who, by the way, just in case I haven't stepped on your toes already, would probably call himself a realist, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples. It's so funny that it says to his fellow disciples. It makes me wonder if maybe he waited until Jesus walked away. Not having seen the 20 examples of he can still hear you, right? So Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go that we may die with him. Now, commentators are a little bit torn as to whether or not this is Thomas genuinely accepting his fate. All right, hey, yeah, they haven't even put the stones down yet. Here we go. Back into enemy territory, back where they don't want Jesus, back where they're accusing him of blasphemy and just about to put him on trial and stone him for it. Or maybe this is a little bit of gallows humor. All right, let's go die then, right? But he's not. He missed it. He missed it because Jesus gave him 3/4 of this comparison. He's fallen asleep. I'm going to go wake him up. Falling asleep means he's dead. And Thomas didn't fill in the blank. So waking him up must mean he'll raise from the dead. He didn't fill in the blank. Looks like we're not getting off the itinerary. Back to Judea we go. What I want you to see from this passage is that it could be that the Lord has given a delay in your life so that one day you will look back and reinforce your belief that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. When Jesus doesn't fill in all the blanks for you about what he's up to, when he doesn't fill in all the blanks about the reason for his delay, when he says things that don't make sense to you, when he acts in ways that don't make sense to you, would you accept his invitation even before he shows the result? To trust his character, to trust that he is playing the long game for God's glory, to trust that it is out of love for you as one of his own, to trust even when maybe it feels to you like it might even be too soon, and to trust that he has redefined the end game of life. We know ultimately how he does that. The gospel is the good news that while we were still sinners, Jesus was born and he died. And he didn't stay dead. He didn't stay dead. He rose from the dead. And that he went to heaven. And that he's coming back again. Maybe that's today. Maybe today is the capital D day of the Lord. Maybe I've got a meeting at 5 o'clock tonight. Maybe I don't even make it. Maybe I'm with him face to face. But if not, I know that I can trust the Lord of the delay. For all of the plates that are still spinning in my life, for all of the juggling balls that are still in the air, for everything that remains unresolved, the question is not, can you trust your circumstances to change? The question is, can you trust Jesus? That's really what it comes down to in this confession from Romans 10:9. That if you confess with your mouth that Jesus Christ is Lord, and you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. That confession that Jesus Christ is Lord means surrendering to him, that he makes it make sense to you. It means surrendering your control over the timing, which, by the way, you never actually had. It means surrendering everything to him. And it's where I would really like to believe that Thomas was sincere. I'll follow Jesus, even to death, because I know that with him, death is not the end. If you've never surrendered your life to Jesus Christ, would you pray this prayer based on that passage of Scripture right now with me? And you could say it in your heart, but the passage says to confess it with your mouth. And maybe that doesn't make sense to you. Maybe you should do it even if it doesn't make sense to you. To confess this with your mouth: Jesus, you are Lord. God, I believe that you raised Jesus from the dead. Save me in his name.